Hi, Andrea Kanaris, founder of All Things Social Impact. I am so excited because we've just finished the early career series and we're getting ready to launch the professional series where we'll talk to some more experienced professionals. But just wanted to round up where we finished off with the early career series. So at the end of it, you'll notice that I asked each of our guests from, Helen, Alexa, and Amy to pose 2 questions to our professionals as they came on. And I thought that I'd take the opportunity before we speak to the other professionals to kind of give a little bit of my response to those questions. And the first one we'll kick off was, why did I get into social impact assessment and how did my journey start? Well, I was a latecomer to social impact assessment. In fact, I was a latecomer to universities. Went back to university age 30. I was kind of bored with my career and I'd have a couple of past lives. We can talk about that some other time. But when I went back to uni, I started off in doing a Bachelor of Social Science, focusing on community international development. And I had no idea what social impact was, that it even existed. And I was in my second year, I think it was, of university when Associate Professor David Ip was taking one of my courses, and God rest his soul. He tapped me on the shoulder and said, I think you'll be interested in this. And he kind of inspired me to explore social impact. He invited me to explore it. And I did as an undergraduate, and he encouraged me to do postgraduate studies in the Masters of Social Planning and Development at the University of Queensland. So that was my introduction. By the time I finished university, I'd done 2 social impact assessments. However, in terms of my journey into my professional life, into social impact assessment, that's where it kind of looked very different. I actually started off my career in health, in government, Queensland Health, and I worked in policy, health service planning, workforce planning, health policy, aged care. So a range of different different areas in social policy, social service planning. So we're still using my skill sets, but not specifically in social impact assessment. So it was later in my career that I actually managed to get the opportunity to do some more social impact assessment work. And that was both in the UK when I was there working in public health and doing health and social impact assessments in the Yorkshire Transport Plan and various other pieces of work I did over there, but also in Australia. And it was in the oil and gas industry as a consultant, plus a few other areas. But that was the big thing at the time. And then it was back into government because with the economic financial crisis, I had done some consulting also on my own in social impact assessment, and then back into government. And then I found myself with the opportunity to work to the Office of the Coordinator General, where I worked in. So as you can see, my career was not a straight line. There's plenty of ways, I hope, that you'll learn from that you can apply your skills that you use for social impact assessment in a range of areas. The question number 2 was my lessons learned around communication, collaboration with others across disciplines, but also across sectors. So across discipline, I think it's really important, and it's something that I actually learned in health that made it very easy for me when I was in social impact assessment to apply this in the EIS process, where I'm working with a lot of people from a variety of different disciplines to actually go, this is my scope of work, stay in your lane, work on what you know. And when you're dealing with other professionals, I think one of the biggest takeaways and lessons to learn is to ask questions, ask clarifications from other professionals. So let me give you an example. If I'm talking about air quality, or I'm reading through the technical reports and I'm asking about air quality or water contamination or something that's really not in the realm of social impact assessment, it's a technical question for them. The way I approach it is I will say to them, I understand it to mean this. Am I correct? Am I understanding this correctly? So they're really good ways to sort of just interact with the technical experts, read their reports, look for their findings. If you think that you're interpreting it or you're not sure you're interpreting properly, then take it back to the expert. Tell them what your interpretation is. Can you just clarify that for me? And also sometimes it's really helpful to say things like, explain it to me like I'm in the 8th grade. Things like that help them to sort of communicate to you in lay terms what their findings mean. So that's the cross-discipline. The other one is cross-sectors. And I think me and Helen had a little bit of a discussion about this one. And this one I found really, it will come up a lot in your career where you might have people say, you know, have you worked in this sector before or that sector before? And I think it's really useful. You're going to come across it. It's really useful to remember that they're hiring you for your expert in social impact assessment, understanding of, you know, the social community development, communications, qualitative, quantitative data analysis. And it doesn't hurt to clarify that for them, to say, you know, I know how to speak to, so I would fall back on, I know how to speak to people from other disciplines to gather that information and understand it from a social perspective. And that's the expertise that I bring. And that happens whichever sector that I'm in. So that's how I tend to deal with it anyway. And then we moved on to the lovely Alexa, and Alexa had some, before we go into Alexa, we did have a bonus question for Helen, and she asked about the principles of social impact assessment and how they apply in working in communities, when you're working in communities in reality. So this is the real world application of some of those principles, because sometimes they seem, you know, kind of high level, ethics and distributive justice and all those. So it's not how people talk when they're on the ground. So I think with principles, certainly go to the IA principles, look at IAP2, their principles and any guidance that they have, certainly understand them from the perspective, and then reflect on about putting things in lay terms. And think when we're talking about ethics, for example, it's applying some of that common sense and going, sometimes it doesn't hurt to say, well, what would I expect? So if I'm talking to somebody and they're giving me some personal information, then I've got to be really clear with them about how their information is going to be used, how it's going to be kept private. Think about how you collect it, because a lot of those times when you're talking about ethics and how you talk to communities, for example, you have to start thinking about it before you get into talking to the communities. It should start with, you know, thinking about how you're going to manage data so that you can protect people's privacy. It's about making sure that you've got good, you know, forms and methods in which you can inform them of their rights, understand the legislation around protecting people's privacy, and making sure that you are clear around asking for permission if you're going to use data. The other one that I find really useful is to make sure that if you're collecting data from people and you want to use quotes or you want to use their information, and you're talking to them to inform your social impact assessment, then it's also really important that the report that you produce that is presented to the decision maker, if you're doing a social impact assessment, but let's say you're developing policy, but really the people who have contributed to your process and have been sharing their information with you should be able to see their voice in your report or in your policy. And what I mean is, it doesn't mean that everything has to be their word for word, or it doesn't have to mean, because everyone's going to have diverse, but your policy, your report should reflect those diverse views. So even if they disagree with your findings, for example, they should be able to go, well, I can see that you considered my view. So that's what you should be aiming for. Protocols around principles, I think it's understand them, understand what they mean in theory, but then when it comes to practice, try and put on a common sense hat. And sometimes that's as simple as going, if it was me, what would I expect? It's not a bad place to start. And if you're not sure, reach out to us people more experienced professionals who can help you through that process. Anyway, so moving on to Alexa. Alexa asked me about what stage of life or time in my career or in your career, if you're a professional listening, because perhaps you can think about this when we speak, is when did you have the most felt you had the most social impact? And for me, it's really interesting because even though I've been doing this for a long time now, one of my earliest experiences, and in fact, I was still at university when I did this job, and I had the privilege of being able to settle refugees. And I would say that helping set up that pilot project for the integrated humanitarian settlement strategy here in Logan, where we took in the first Sudanese refugees, was probably, still remains, one of my favorite experiences. It was hard. I learned a lot of lessons from that experience. I made mistakes, but it was rewarding. And it was rewarding in the sense that there's immediate feedback. I could see their progression in the first 12 months from when they first arrived and they knew nothing and they had nowhere to live, and we were settling them into houses and we were hand-holding them, to 12 months later where they were pretty much self-sufficient on their own, living their lives. And I could see the benefits of the work that we were doing in their lives. So that's really rewarding. That's that instant gratification. I think one of the other experiences that I had was really felt was rewarding was when I did the research into chroming, which is, sniffing petrol. At the time it was paint, and petrol also was one of the things people were doing. But we did some research into the police powers and also the places of safety that were set up. So I was in both evaluations, and that led to Queensland's approach for how they dealt with chroming. And I would say that's really rewarding. And that was a longer term process. It's not immediate. It takes a while to see that play out. But they're probably two of my favorite pieces of work, and I've done lots of other things that I really love, but I thought those were two really nice examples. And the other one thing that Alexa asked me was is how to make your work more accessible to others to learn from. And I think there's multiple ways that we do that. Obviously, I've started this podcast, so that's certainly one, but that's a new one. But if I reflect on the past, I would say it is attending forums, sitting on panel discussions, and obviously when I've got team members, then it's obviously coaching them one-on-one. I also am a mentor for UQ and other places. So that's kind of how I share and make my work accessible. But I think it's something we could probably all do. I think maybe we could think a bit more about how we do that. And I'm hoping that this podcast helps resolve some of those issues. So moving on, last but certainly not least, was the lovely Amy. And she asked me to reflect, or asked us professionals to reflect on their early career and what we may have done different, or what we may encourage others to do in their early career. For me, this is a hard one because it seems so long ago, but I don't know if I'd change what I'd do. So I'm going to ask this. I'm going to go on what I would encourage other people to do. So I would encourage people to not be scared to take opportunities. So that is one. The other thing I would say is, that's a tougher one. The other thing, I did have something and it kind of went out of my head. One is definitely encourage others to take opportunities. Don't stay somewhere that you're not happy. And I don't mean that every day at work has to be happy and loads of fun and party on. But what I mean is, if you don't fit, if it's making you miserable, then I think it's smart to look elsewhere. Because sometimes it's about finding the place that you fit. And sometimes it's about finding people who have the same kind of values, share the same style of working. And it doesn't mean they have to match your values exactly. It's about, at least there's a level of understanding. At least you can work with them, and at least they listen to you, they respect you, even if they disagree with you. And I think that's really important. The other thing I would advise people to do, which is more challenging in today's environment and what I've observed, is get into the workplace. Because the one thing I found that I really benefited from was having mentors face-to-face that I could. And it's not always just having a coffee with them or having one-on-one conversations. It's also observing how they behave, how they run a meeting, how they talk to people on the phone, how they behave daily in the workplace. You learn a lot from that. So even if you're working from home, take as much opportunity as you can to be in the office, particularly when you know that your senior people around you that have got experience are going to be in the office, so you can learn from them. Be under their nose, let them see what you can do, but also watch and observe what they do. Really good tip. The last one I would say is, the question from me was future of social impact. It's an interesting question, and I think it's a good question because social impact has changed a lot over the years from when I came. Not necessarily, I mean, practice has evolved, yes, but I think also in terms of understanding what it is and interest in what it is. So I think you'll hear a lot of us who've been around for a while go, in the early days, there weren't any people attending or talking about social impact. It was really hard to get heard. Now everyone's talking about social impact. And I think that that's a good thing. And what I would like to see personally I would like to see, and I think in Australia, say Queensland and New South Wales have certainly put a lot more focus on social impact with their guidelines, in Queensland with the legislation. And I would like to see Queensland expand the legislation beyond just mining and resourcing and into the broader industries, particularly large-scale complex projects. I think they need more attention than sitting at the DA level. So I'd like to see that happen. And I think we may see that. I think social impact has a bigger role to play outside of project base, and would love to see social impact considered and social risk considered very early in policy strategy. I'd love to see government departments using these skills, using these methods in the work that they do when they're starting legislation. That's my view. I think there's a way forward for that. Whether I'm being predictive or hopeful, I don't know, but that's my take on that. So we'll pose these questions and we'll explore some of these topics with the professionals. So keep watching. And remember, people, hit the like button, share it, and subscribe. Because when you subscribe to the channel, I can attract more professionals and more people who will come on the podcast so that we can all learn together and grow as a community. So thank you for listening. I hope that was useful. And remember, April the 8th, we've got Dr. Marcus Kerziak, who's going to be my very first professional talking on this. He's a wonderful experience in social performance and social impact. He's now currently at Oz IMM. You're not going to want to miss what he has to say. I'll see you next time.